My parents are true survivors. I have to always say that because there came a point where everybody was going around saying, I was a Holocaust survivor. I was a Holocaust survivor. Every 2 out of 3 Jews you would meet in the street, I was a Holocaust survivor. They were not.
They left. Their
Well,
families
well,
left
they got
before.
out. They
Yeah.
got out in various ways. A large number of them, when Poland was divided in 1939, they went to the Russian side. They escaped that way. Others, like you said, they got out earlier, like Henry Kissinger, 1935, 1936, they get out when they see what's coming. My parents were among the few actual survivors. The numbers given are like in 1945, about 100,000 Jews survived either the ghettos, the concentration camps, or the death camps. No, excuse me. Either the ghettos, the concentration camps, or the labor camps. And most of those who survived, were in all three. My mother and father, may they rest in peace, they were in the Warsaw Ghetto. They were then in Majdanek concentration camp. My father ended up in Auschwitz concentration camp. My mother ended up in 2 slave labor camps. So they were the real deal. As my mother would say, the real McCoy. They were in the Nazi Holocaust. Why do I mention all this? I mention it for the following reason. Because, as I've already indicated to you, not because I was smart, but because I was smart enough to want to be among the smart crowd. I hung out with very smart, high achievers, high achievers. And remember, I grew up in the 60s. Politics were all around you. The war in Vietnam, the civil rights movement, the Black Power movement. Politics was in the air. The air was saturated with politics. Now, here's the kicker. I could say without fear of contradiction, you can even put a polygraph to my wrist right now, and I do not fear saying, in my whole childhood, I do not remember one friend, not one friend or parent of a friend, who ever asked me a single question about what happened to my parents. They knew that they had been in the Nazi Holocaust. My father had the tattoo. Auschwitz was the only camp that issued a tattoo, and my father had the tattoo from Auschwitz. Nobody had any interest in it. It's the kind of, as I said, an optical illusion. You assume, and your mother tells you, we were all, concerned about Israel, concerned about the Holocaust. It's not true. The only book we read in school, pertaining to the Nazi Holocaust was in 7th grade. We read Anne Frank's diary.
Yeah.
And even Anne Frank's diary, it was not taught as a Jewish tragedy. The Jewish element was completely eliminated. It was taught as a human tragedy. The Jewish part was just taken out. So I think we have to. There's a famous Hungarian Marxist. His name was George Lukács, and Lukács once wrote that we have to always see the present as history. And I think it's a useful observation that we shouldn't assume that what we see at present always was. Yes, it's true. Now there is, certainly for your parents' generation, a very heightened sensitivity to the fragility of the state of Israel and the Nazi Holocaust. But that's all pretty recent. It happened after the 1967 war, after the June War, which I'm not going to go into now. But I would also say 2 other things in response to your question. I know this is about a kind of circumlocution or a digression, really. When I was growing up, The only thing we learned about American history regarding the Native Americans was that they were savages.
Right.
I vividly remember, it's not a source of pride to me, but it's worth acknowledging for your generation. I remember watching the cowboy and Indian um, programs, the TV shows and movies, and I'm rooting for them. Kill those savages! Kill those savages! I mean, I was like kind of mad, but they built up, they built up that lunacy in the viewer. I remember. I know it's going to sound hilarious to you, how pained and anguished and tormented I was when I watched Remember the Alamo. It was a famous Walt Disney film. The Alamo was where Davy Crockett died, Lieutenant Rip
I
Travers.
lived in San Antonio for 6 years. I'm
Okay,
extremely familiar with the Alamo.
okay,
Very
I
familiar with
remember the Alamo. I was there once.
Everybody who ever came to visit, I got to go to the Alamo.
okay. So you're on the same page as me, as your generation puts it. So I didn't know until probably I was in my 30s that the United States stole Texas. I hated Lieutenant Santa Anna. I wanted to kill Lieutenant Santa Anna
Right.
because he defeated the defenders of the Alamo. It wasn't until, believe it or not, it wasn't until 1975 that Hollywood made its first film sympathetic to Native Americans. It was with Dustin Hoffman. It was called Little Big Men.
Yeah.
That was the first film. So when you talk about meaning American Jewish brainwashing about Israel, there's also the American brainwashing, which is roughly the same time, about our own history.
Right.
It was completely suppressed. Completely suppressed.
Yeah, we had Margaret Kimberly on Memorial Day, and we talked about the Tulsa Massacre, which I was never taught in school. I never got taught that. Largest race massacre in the history of the country, and we're not taught that.
Yeah, so I don't want to. Israel should be held culpable and responsible for all of its crimes, its ongoing crimes. But we should not put ourselves in the position of forgetting our own history and forgetting just how recent is our own understanding and knowledge of what was done here. And not so long ago, the textbooks, I remember, I know you'll find these things because I am old. And so I'm talking about a long time ago. But I distinctly remember as late as sophomore year in high school, my history teacher was named Mr. Storch, a smart guy. He went to Columbia. At that point, New York City, the highest paid civil service job was teachers. And so teachers were both respected and deserving of respect because they were smart. They were paid very well. Now teachers, they're below fire department, below police, below sanitation. But back then they attracted a very impressive group of faculty. In any event, I remember Mr. Storch saying, he said, slavery wasn't so bad. He said, because slaves were expensive property. And just as if you purchased a new car, you wouldn't take a hammer to damage the car that you just purchased, slaves were also very expensive. So obviously, so the logic went, the slaves were treated very well by their masters. Hey, I was in the advanced history class. It was AP history. And back then, AP was something unusual. Now it became everything is AP. I was in the top class. History was my, so to speak, forte. And the best teacher. But that's what we were taught. That's what we were taught. So I can't express shock at the ignorance of American Jews about Israeli history, and also the fact that Israel has a very effective propaganda apparatus,
Yes.
PR machine. We had our effective propaganda apparatus. It was called public education.
Thanks for watching. If you want to support our mission to transform politics into service, please like this video, subscribe, follow us on social media, and consider joining our Patreon, where you'll get early access to our interviews as well as other exclusive content. Links are in the description. Peace out.